Okay, so we join the soles of the feet together and we pull our heels in close. We drop our knees down. This is the butterfly pose. It's an adductor or groin stretch. You can keep your spine straight, which will protect the spine more. But if you let your spine round, as long as you still feel the stretch here, you get an added therapeutic for the spine, decompressing the spine a little bit. Okay, so for most people, that probably would be the most advantageous way to approach this, that you let your back round, you come forward, you feel the stretch here, and you might feel a little bit of something in your back. For people with a back injury, then you would want to keep your spine more straight. Also, people who maybe are more flexible in their adductors, maybe your knees are all the way on the ground, then using the spine and using your muscles to tilt the pelvis more aggressively will give you a better stretch. And of course, if you are somebody who you're not getting a satisfying stretch, then I need to hear from you. This week I had several students during this flow who they were just very flexible. I don't know, it could be genetic. It could be that they do dance or ballet or martial arts, or they do a lot of yoga. It could be a combination. Whatever it is, that they were not getting a satisfying stretch in certain of the positions in this particular flow. So again, that's a good reason to reach out to me. And you don't have to reach out right now unless you want to, but just contact me and remember the shape of the pose. This is the butterfly. That was giving you trouble, and let me know. And usually it's not difficult to find a solution. Very often, I'd say more often than not, the first thing I suggest is the thing that brings relief to the person. Sometimes it's a little more tricky and we need to have a little back and forth, which is not a problem. A great way of thinking about what you're doing with your yoga practice and these postures, it's a lot like you would work with a doctor or a psychiatrist or somebody like that. I think a good doctor or psychiatrist is, if they prescribe something to you, they're going to let you know that you should advise them of any negative side effects. And so if you start taking some medicine that works great for most of the population, but it doesn't work great for you, you aren't meant to just keep taking that medicine and suffer with the side effect. Instead, you're meant to advise your doctor or psychiatrist, hey, this is happening. I'm getting a rash, or I'm feeling anxious, or whatever it might be. And then the doctor or psychiatrist can give you feedback. They can say, well, that's normal for the first week. Just let's wait another week and let's see what happens. Or they might say, stop immediately. Okay? So again, this is a thing I notice a lot teaching, is there is a real reluctance for people to speak up. And I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not sure where this comes from. I'm not sure if it comes from the education system, that we grow up in a system where questions aren't necessarily encouraged. A teacher might say, ask a question, but then you ask a question and you might actually get made fun of. That's happened to me before. Like, oh, you weren't listening. I just said XYZ. So then we learn, oh, okay, it's not safe to do that. I won't be doing that again. Even when I'm completely lost and confused, struggling, I'm just not going to say anything. So it could be from that. It could be me personally, that people don't feel safe asking me. I really don't. It could be a combination of things. It's just something I've noticed. And so because I've noticed that, I need to try and counteract that. So that's why I'm saying all this today. If you are struggling with anything, if you don't feel a stretch, if it's too much, if you're in pain, if you're confused about something, please, please, please contact me. Now, most of the time, you're not going to need that. I've been doing this a long time, so I think I'm able to head off a lot of difficulties and questions before they arise, which is a good thing. But I just want to put it out there that you might still encounter trouble, and the solution is to ask me to reach out. Okay, dragonfly is next. So the legs are wide. Many people will gain advantage by sitting on something. So that could be a block, that could be a bolster, even like a folded blanket. You don't need to worry about pointing your toes in any particular direction. They can go wherever they are comfortable or wherever you feel an advantage. So again, you can flex, you can point the toes, but we're just letting our upper body come forward and down in a relaxed manner. And as always, you can support your body if necessary. So what would that look like? Maybe a block under your forehead, placing your forearms or hands on a block, even putting some pillows in front of you and laying on the pillows. Now, I think everybody in attendance today knows very well that the exception to that is if I lose the stretch in here, then I need to not use so much support. I need to let gravity pull me in more aggressively. Okay, so yin is exercise. It isn't relaxation. You might find it very relaxing, and that's nice, but this is a very, very common confusion. That in fact, I'd say the deep relaxation generally comes from doing the exercises properly. And so that's what I'm trying to cover with this. Like, let's make sure we're doing this properly. Many people think, oh, yin is supposed to be, the teacher's not supposed to talk, and I'm just supposed to sit there and listen to relaxing music. You can practice in that way if you know all the information you need to know, if you know the right way to practice. But you may not. Okay, so very, very important that we understand the biomechanics of what's going on. This is exercise. We are trying to stress and change the tissues in our body. So here we're targeting these adductors, and that's Western anatomy. That's a Western conception of the body. But I find there's not really a contradiction between the Western and the Eastern way of looking at things. They're different perspectives, and in my mind, they actually complement one another. They're not the same. So again, this is why there can be an advantage to that. And this isn't unique to yoga. I studied economics in school, and there are different philosophies or perspectives on economics. And so the Central Bank of the United States uses one model, economic model, to try and predict and understand the economy. But there are other models that it could use. And if it used those models or those ideas, the economy might perform very differently. So we can choose, say, I'm only going to look at this model, I'm going to ignore any other perspective. We can do that. But I find when it comes to health and yoga and healing and happiness, it is advantageous for us to have more than one perspective. And I will usually talk about those from time to time because, again, I've found so much value in it. And part of the reason I find value in it is if you look at the Western medical model, which is a chemical and mechanical based model for the most part. So the chemistry is basically drugs, and then the mechanical part is what we call surgery and devices that you implant into the body. So that's one way of looking at health and healing. The body is like a machine, and like a machine, if a part fails, you can replace it. And if chemical reaction is out of balance, you can supplement or fix it by introducing certain other chemicals. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it works within reason. It works to a degree. But there will be cases where the Western model actually says, oh, there's nothing we can do about that. Or it can give you a perspective. Let's unwind onto the back. It can give you an option that you would prefer not to do. So as an example, our bodies, the parts regenerate. Okay, if we're healthy and if things are functioning properly, the body is designed to regenerate itself. So when something is damaged, it basically repairs itself, it regenerates itself. From the Eastern perspective, when that isn't happening, it usually means something is out of balance. Something is out of balance. And very often that could be emotional in nature. It can be mental in nature. It could be environmental. It could be lifestyle. It's not necessarily having to do with the part that's malfunctioning. The root cause can be any of those other things. So in Eastern medicine, you very often are asked to answer these well, how much are you sleeping? What are you eating these days? They'll look at your constitution. They'll ask about stress, things like that, because those are relevant from that perspective. Okay, let's go ahead and bring our legs in. Give them a little squeeze, shake it out. All right, now we come into half butterfly. So right leg is straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh, and we're trying to stretch the back of the thigh. So this can be nice because let's say I go to a Western doctor who has this mechanical and chemical perspective, and that's all they've got. They just have this one viewpoint, and I'm having trouble with my hip. And usually, from what I've heard, you get one of two answers when they look at your hip. You're like, Doc, I've got pain in my hip. They say, okay. They take a scan, and then one of two things usually happen. If they see damage and it's enough, they will recommend surgery. And usually that means replacing a part of your physical body. Now, your physical body is a whole, and everything affects everything else. And so now you're introducing some foreign object into your body as a permanent part of your body. Well, that's likely to affect the synergistic effect of your body, the synergistic health of your body. Also, these foreign objects, they don't regenerate. And just like most machines, they wear out. So the body, again, when it's functioning properly, it regenerates itself. It doesn't need parts to be replaced. Your car doesn't regenerate itself, right? So your car, if you drive it long enough, eventually a certain part's going to fail and it's going to need replacing. And if you drive it long enough, every part of your car will need replacing, right? Just over time, it's just going to happen. Human body, at least in theory, is designed to keep regenerating itself throughout its lifetime. So if I take out one of my original parts, let's say the hip, the femur, right? The head of my femur. This is a very common thing these days. And I take that out, I cut it off, I put in a replacement part. That replacement part does not regenerate. And so my understanding is hip replacements last about 10 to 15 years. And then you need another surgery. You'll need to get it replaced again. Now, if that truly is the only option, then yeah, that might make a lot of sense. If that's the only way to alleviate the pain and the dysfunction in your hip, then by all means, that's what you should do, because it's no fun living your life in a lot of pain. But you already know 10 to 15 years you're going to need a new part, a new replacement. What if, and I'm just putting this out there, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, but what if you sought a different perspective? So instead of just saying, okay, this one perspective that my hip is shot, it's never going to get better, there's nothing I can do. What if I seek another perspective, a perspective that says the body actually can regenerate itself if we do the right things, if we address the dysfunction at its root. And again, as I said earlier, the root may not be in the hip. It might actually be emotional. It might actually be mental. It might be environmental. It might be your lifestyle, right? Choices that you're making. It might have to do with your diet. Any number of things. And this is where I think in the West we have a lot of resistance, because we tend to grow up with more or less an almost hedonistic kind of a approach to life, that life is about pleasures. So life is about, having a beer when you want a beer, having cake when you want cake, partying when you want to party, staying up late if you like staying up late. I think it's starting to shift and change, but a lot of what drives our culture and advertising and all this kind of perspective is enjoy yourself, do what you want to do, have what you want to have. That's what life is all about. That's how you get the most out of life. So it's kind of hard to send that message out in advertising and then tell people, whoa, you need to postpone enjoyment. You need to postpone pleasure. You need to make hard choices. It just doesn't really jibe with the messages we're getting from, advertising. Let's switch sides. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting this is evil or there's any kind of conspiracy theory or anything like that. These are just kind of the way things are. Our culture only emphasizes health and well-being and balance to a degree. Very often you have to kind of opt into that. It's not necessarily as part of the zeitgeist of our culture. Again, I think this is beginning to shift and change gradually, but for many people, unless they really choose to start learning about health and diet and well-being, they very well can go on eating things that really are hurting their health and making choices that are hurting their health without having any idea that that's what they're doing. So that's what's so interesting about it. So different perspectives from my perspective, if you will, can be very, very valuable. If I go to my doctor and she's like, oh, okay, so let me rewind. There are two options when let's say you go with a hip thing. And so they scan you, and usually they will, if there's enough damage, they will say, well, okay, I'm going to recommend you for surgery. And I've already covered some of the downside of that. Once you remove your original part, it won't regenerate. So you already know you're getting another surgery if you live 10 or 15 years. You know that that's coming. That part will fall apart. And having dated a surgeon for many years, every surgery is a big deal. You may not think that, your surgeon may not make you aware of that, but as someone who saw people who've had multiple surgeries, my ex would say people who've had multiple surgeries, their bodies are just a mess. They're a mess. It's not healthy. What you find in there when you open somebody up who's had multiple surgeries, it's just a mess. So again, I don't think the medical profession is necessarily going to advertise this to you. Your doctor is not going to say, oh yeah, we're going to do surgery on you and you're going to be a mess afterwards. But that might actually be the case, because again, my partner was just sharing with me very candidly what she found in her work. So her the thing she would say is, I hope I never have to get surgery. And this is as someone who performed surgery on people just about every day. All right, she saw the effects of surgery. Again, sometimes it's necessary. So she was a surgeon for a reason, because she could save a life. She could change someone's life for the better. I guess the main message that I'm trying to get across is it's a big deal. It shouldn't be a decision that's taken lightly, and I think in our culture it is. It's sort of taken like, oh, I'll just get surgery, problem solved. But that surgery can lead to other complications, other problems, other surgeries down the line. If you think nothing ever goes wrong in surgery, that's another mistake. Things can go very, very wrong, and I've had many stories shared with me where they do. Doctors are people, and people make mistakes. Plus, sometimes bad things happen for whatever reason, okay? So we can have the best doctor even doesn't make any mistakes, and yet something can go wrong. So the other option that happens is the doctor looks at the scan and says, well, I don't really see any damage, so I can't recommend surgery. And then they can give you painkillers, right? That's the chemical solution. Your check engine light is coming on, right? The check engine light is the pain. And so you say, all right, I'm just going to take the light bulb out of the check engine light. So you won't feel the pain anymore. Problem didn't go away. That's how I view pain, and pain is a check engine light. It's saying, hey, you need to look at something. And again, that something may not be the hip itself. It might be emotional repression. It might be mental stress. It might be mold in your house. It might be a diet that doesn't suit you. So again, you might even think you're on a healthy diet, but perhaps the diet you're on isn't actually suiting your constitution, and your health is actually hurting you in some way. All right, let's go ahead and unwind from that. So, in my view, masking the pain, and there are always exceptions to every rule, so I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad or guilty or paint anyone as, being evil. Doctors are just trying to help, and doctors are overworked. So I have a lot of respect for doctors, a lot of admiration. Do I think they're perfect? No. Do I think the things they tell you are always right? No. Because again, they're people. They only know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. So again, maybe in the East, they've known how to heal or cure a certain issue for a long time, but Western doctors are just not trained in Eastern medicine. So they don't know. They tell you, oh, there's no cure for that. But if you go to an Eastern practitioner, they might say, oh, sure, take this herb, do this exercise, breathe in this way, start meditating, whatever it might be. All right, let's go ahead and counter stretch, and we'll come into it. We'll hinge up and then come into tabletop. Let's do a little bit of our cat-cow here, or bear pose as we call it in yin. So we're just moving around a little bit. This is mostly targeting your torso and your hips and your shoulders. And then when you're done with that, you can come into your down dog and give things a little stretch there. And then we'll come into the sleeping swan. So right knee toward the right wrist, the hips are down and back. And then you can just let your torso come forward and down. I might stay up because I'm talking, and it's kind of hard to talk sometimes when you're laying with your face in the mat. Okay, so we want to feel it here. The knee can be straight ahead or out to the side. The foot can pull up, level with the knee, or it can be back toward the hip. The hips can rock to the left or the right. Now remember, the main thing is I want to feel the stretch here. I want to feel safe, especially in my knee, my ankle. And I want to be comfortable enough to hold that for the full 5 minutes. Okay, if any of those criteria aren't met, feel free to experiment, right? You might be able to figure out how to fix it on your own, and I encourage that. But again, if you can't, that's where the teacher's experience and training hopefully comes to the rescue, right? Just like doctors, yoga teachers don't know everything. I don't know everything. I don't know your body. I don't know what you feel. I don't know your injuries, your medical history. So again, this is where hopefully I've had enough training, enough experience. Hopefully I know some things that you may not know because of that training and experience, where even if you can't figure it out on your own, I wouldn't assume the teacher can't help you or the teacher won't have a suggestion that maybe you haven't thought of, okay? So perspectives, this is where I think it can be nice to be able to embrace more than one perspective. And there are areas where there might be contradictions, but this is true in science and medicine as well. Believe it or not, there are different perspectives in science and medicine, competing perspectives. So if you think all scientists agree, you're kidding yourself, okay? There are different competing theories about the nature of reality. There's string theory, there's chaos theory, there's multiverse theory. There's all kinds of different ideas that are competing to explain the nature of reality, and they don't all necessarily line up. Okay, not all scientists are going to agree on things. So I think one of the misconceptions we can grow up with, and I'm always talking from my own experience, okay? So I'm never like saying, oh, you idiot for believing this, you know. I'm talking to my old self. I used to believe this. I used to think this way. So I used to think that, you know, oh, science says this. All scientists agree on that. No, that is not the case at all. There will be dissenting voices. There will be people with different opinions. And contrary to what you may believe, sometimes that minority is actually correct at the end of the day. Okay? We've lived with science long enough now that there are instances where the consensus was X, and over time, with experience, we learn that actually the data, when it's looked at more rigorously or in more detail or with a new measuring device, the data actually shows that the answer is Y, not X. And there might have been a few doctors or scientists who were brave enough at the time to say this doesn't align, the consensus view doesn't align with what I'm seeing or what my experience is. And in the end, they're proven right. Now, that doesn't always happen, okay? But this is why treating science like a religion can be dangerous. And I use science in my teaching because people find it very compelling. So when I'm trying to get people to do something that they might be reluctant to do, I will very often cite scientific research and studies because it tends to soften their reluctance. But people might think because I'm saying that I'm saying, oh, well, that's, you know, end of story. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to motivate and inspire people to do something. And for many modern people, when you talk about, well, there's scientific research showing X, people are more likely to listen. They're more likely to try something. Okay, let's switch sides. You know, this is opposed, like, how do you get people to do something that you feel is good for them, but that they're very reluctant to do? Or at least some people might be reluctant to do. How do you do that? Well, one way is you just assume a position of authority. And You assume that everyone has to listen to you. So maybe you're a very intimidating character. Maybe you yell at people and shame people and scare them. I mean, that's one way. And I actually know yoga teachers that do that. Maybe you've never been to a yoga class like that, but I have, and they're out there. So I think this is a very old world approach to motivating people. You know, basically, oh, if you want to do this, I'm going to scare the bejesus out of you. One show I really enjoy is Cobra Kai. Having grown up with the Karate Kid, that's a fun, spin-off of that story. So if you look at the way that Cobra Kai, if you know the story at all and you know the characters, the way that the Cobra Kai teachers motivate is they're usually trying to shame students, embarrass them, scare them. Those are the tactics that they use. And they might get results, but they might also create damage in the individuals as they do that. And then if you contrast that with the way that Miyagi-Do tries to motivate, they're usually trying to inspire and educate, and it's not so much about, oh, you're terrified of me, that's why you're going to do the work. It's a different kind of motivation. And so for me, I've never really resonated with the militant scare tactics approach. I don't respond to it very well. And I don't really want people to be afraid of me. I don't think it's the best. I don't think it's good for learning and teaching. I really don't. So the reason I speak so much during the class and I try and share information is the way I try and motivate is through education, through understanding, through learning why you might benefit. So again, science is going to be a part of that, but also part of it for me is the traditions that these practices actually come from. From my perspective, those traditions are very ancient and they're still with us because people have found value in them. People tend to not let go of or give up things that are bringing them value. Sometimes people hang on to things for the wrong reason. So I'm not going to say that everything people do in modern times is because it has value. Sometimes we have prejudice. Sometimes we have certain beliefs that we just hang on to, not for any good reason, just because they were uncomfortable without them or something like that. But some things, especially things that maybe require more work or effort, like yoga, it's not just holding a belief. You actually have to practice and do things. Usually, if people are getting value out of those things, it's because they find value in it. It's bringing them health or it's bringing them happiness. So again, I can motivate using science and knowledge. I can motivate using tradition. But for many people, using things like religion, religious doctrine, and many of these practices are spiritual traditions, and they come from cultures where there were certain kind of shared spiritual or mythological ideas, and those were used to motivate people. It makes sense. If everyone believes in a certain deity or a certain reality, like reincarnation, right, or heaven, okay, those are two things that we can't really prove to other people, right, that heaven exists. Like, how are you going to prove that to me? You could be like, oh, well, I have a friend and she died and she went to heaven, she came back. That's not proof. That's a story, okay? I'm not saying that didn't happen to your friend. I'm just saying that's not proof. That's not evidence. Same with reincarnation. Oh, there are all these babies and they talk about their past lives. And that's not proof, okay? That's not evidence. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. And we'll make our way onto our back. So I'm not saying that there's no value in those ideas or that they can't be used. Again, in the past they were used. I could motivate Christians by saying, hey, if you do this, you're going to go to heaven, right? If it's said in the Bible that without doing yoga, you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven, well, every Christian would be doing yoga, wouldn't they? Okay, if it said that. Because again, that's a way of motivating people. That's one way we can motivate people, is to say, well, God said this, or divinity says that about something, okay? So that's one way, but in modern times, that doesn't work as well because people have different belief systems. Even within Christianity, you find that there are different ideas competing. So again, we can say, well, I'm a Christian, but that doesn't mean that my ideas about what gets me into heaven and gets me in God's good graces is going to be the same as another Christian, right? There are wildly differing views amongst Christians. Okay, let's go ahead and bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze, shake it out. And then we'll come up to seated for our last set. So now we want to target the front of the thigh. Those are your quads. So we fold that foot back. And we want to feel a stretch here in the front of the thigh. Be mindful of your knee and ankle. So the toes can point back or out to the side. The knee can be straight ahead or it can angle out as long as you still feel a stretch here. And you might want to sit on something like a block. Okay? If you're sitting upright like I am right now and you feel the stretch, then I would just stay there. That's enough because that's what we're going for. Okay, if you don't feel the stretch, and I don't, then you can begin to lower back, hands, elbows, bolster, crown of your head, or all the way back on your back. Even here, I'm not feeling much stretch, so I'll place this foot on the ground and drop my left knee out to the left. Now I feel a stretch. I just happen to have very open quads for whatever reason. Everybody's body is different. And where my body holds tension, the types of activities that I do, again, is going to be different than where you hold tension. Many people hold a lot of tension here, and this is a very challenging stretch for them to do safely because the tension here often affects the knee directly, and so people may feel unsafe stressing that knee, okay? So again, this would be a good example of if it's giving you grief, just reach out to me and we'll go over some options real quick of what you can explore as alternatives. All right, so anyway, I hope today's talk was interesting and valuable for you. This is just something that I've found in my experience that I don't have to subscribe to one view or say one view is right and all the other views are wrong. And again, I mention this because I used to think that way. All right, so I'm not saying any of you do, but I definitely did. And if I did, I have to assume there probably are some other people that think in the same way. So my experience of these things is different groups of people at different times, they tend to capture certain elements of the truth, certain things that really make sense. They have a certain worldview, and it allows them to see things in a certain way that another group of humans maybe can't. Now, the nice thing about being a modern human is that we have access to the perspective that we grew up with, which is usually the modern perspective, unless you grew up in China or India in a village or a very traditional household or something like that. You probably grew up with a very Western, science-oriented perspective, right? Where if something is scientifically proven, you're just going to believe that, at least if that's what is said to be the case. Oh, this has science, it's safe, it's whatever. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to believe that. I'm going to make decisions and act on that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Except when we reach a situation where maybe science says, well, I don't have an answer for you. We can't heal you. You're just broken, and we don't have any therapy, and we don't have any way of fixing it, and we don't know what the answer is. Or when you get the answer and it produces negative results. And I've known people who've had that instance too. They start taking a drug to cure a problem, and it actually creates more problems. Or they get a surgery to heal something, and either the thing isn't fixed, or actually maybe things get worse as a result. So again, these are real things that happen to real people. It's not something that's advertised. It's not something that's talked about a ton, but it does happen. So what's nice is, as modern people, we have access to other points of view if we want to take them. And so at least some people I know, they've explored the Western approach. They did everything that the doctor said, and they weren't getting better. And so then they said, Chinese medicine says this. Why don't I try that? And they start getting better for whatever reason. Again, we don't have to choose. We can use either one when the instance is appropriate. Sometimes I'll say, if you ever are in a car accident and you get a limb severed or something from your body, acupuncture is not going to help you. Yoga therapy is not going to help you. Don't go to a chiropractor, right? You need a surgeon. That's why surgery was invented. Let's switch sides. I don't know if you know this, if you know about the history of surgery, but according to my ex, who was the surgeon, she said, surgery came from the battlefield, where people had severed limbs and, parts of their body were just completely tore up. And so the medical professionals of the time said, well, this person's going to die, so maybe we can sew their limb back on. Maybe we can sew their stomach back up. Maybe they'll get better and survive. And some people did. So again, not a evil thing, not a bad thing. That was what made sense at the time. But because of our somewhat, I think, limited perspective on reality, where most of us growing up have a actual limited knowledge of what science actually is, the scientific perspective. Most of us, what we think of as scientific is what's called Newtonian physics. And that's the old physics, folks. It's not that it is disproven, it just is a very small segment of reality. And that's the reality of our senses. That's why it's so appealing to us as human beings. That's why we are like, well, that's not scientific. That can't be true. We hear about ghosts. We're like, oh, there's no such thing as ghosts. If we hear about reincarnation, oh, that can't be true. If we hear about a soul, oh, there's no such thing as a soul. Because we just tend to focus so much on the material. And that's what Newtonian physics verifies, if you will. But I think everybody has heard of quantum physics, okay? And quantum physics is the physics that gave us these computers and phones that we are using right now to have this class, to create the type of communications networks that we're using. Modern life is very much the result of the findings of quantum physics. Quantum physics has a lot of paradox in it. It's not A plus B equals C. It's not like that. There's a lot of probability. There's a lot of paradox. There are things that do not make sense to us. So quantum entanglement is one example I'll give you, which is if you split a particle into two, the particles are spinning, okay? And if you change the rotation of one particle, the other particle instantly changes, no matter the distance. So you can have them millions of miles apart, and the instant you change one particle's rotation, the other particle switches direction as well. So that's called quantum entanglement. And it's just one example of the weird stuff we find in quantum physics. Now again, the temptation is to say, well, that's some kind of weird thing that has no bearing on my life. But it does, because we're using the findings of quantum physics to have this class right now. The laptop and the technology that I'm using to transmit to you comes directly from those findings. So I mention that because, again, so many of us in the West grow up with science and the fruits of science, and we think we understand what science is saying, what's possible and what's not possible. But the truth is, 100, 200 years ago, if I said, oh, I can transmit images through the air, invisibly, over great distances, people would have laughed at you. They would have thought you were crazy. They would have thought that was impossible. But because we see its effect, none of us understand it, right? We don't really understand what's going on, the technology, the microprocessors and all that. We don't really understand it. But because it's there, we take it for granted. So I bring it up just to hopefully help you keep an open mind that some of the things that are talked about in these ancient traditions that we may have a resistance to when we first hear about it, or think, oh, that can't be possible, that can't be true. If you keep an open mind, you might actually find that you may be able to heal things or do things that current medicine just isn't up to speed on. One day it may get there, but currently the way doctors are trained or what they're taught, they just are unaware of a certain possibility. Just like, 200 years ago, physicists were unaware of the truths of quantum physics, right? It took time and research and certain people finding things for quantum physics to make its way into the mainstream of science. All right, let's come on out of that. I'll share with you a little fun story about quantum physics. Some of you may have heard me tell this before, but Einstein was not studying quantum physics. He was studying other things like relativity. Very smart man, but not flawless. Again, scientists can make mistakes. So a colleague of his, Niels Bohr, was studying quantum physics, and they were pen pals. They would write to each other and share findings. So as Niels Bohr and his team and other quantum physicists got deeper into it, they found a lot of paradox. Again, that it was like probability, and things that didn't make sense were coming up as the right answer for things. And Einstein would keep writing back to Niels Bohr, well, that can't be right. It can't be probabilistic. And he would say often, God doesn't play dice with the universe, because what Einstein liked about science is he believed it proved how logical God was, right? That we were figuring out how God thinks through science. That's kind of how Einstein thought of it. And Einstein he believed in God. So he'd say to Niels, God doesn't play dice with the universe. God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, eventually Niels Bohr came back and he said, stop telling God what he can do. Einstein, right? You're smart, but you don't know what you don't know. And Niels Bohr and his team were right, because like I said, what we are sharing now is a direct result of their findings. So if they were wrong, none of this technology would work. Okay, so again, there can be conflicts of opinion, perspective. Einstein contributed a lot to science, but he didn't contribute to the quantum physics side of things. So again, that was different people. And he may not have been able to, because he had this sort of viewpoint. He had a bias that might not have allowed him to see that. Okay? So I just think that's a fun story. And it kind of illustrates what I'm showing, that even a genius like Einstein isn't necessarily right in their opinion about everything, and their perspective can still be limited. Okay? All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. You can counter stretch, you can take a little rest if you'd like, but we rest between the postures, so if you want to get on with your day, go right ahead. I hope to see you on Monday for flow. Otherwise, have a lovely weekend.